Ukrainian forces successfully targeted and eliminated Russian troops, also equipment gathering in HIMARS for an offensive on Lipsk, using drones, airstrikes and an armored vehicle raid, according to geolocated footage and military sources. Today, there are a lot of developments in the Kharkiv direction. The most interesting news comes from the Lipsk area, Kharkiv Oblast. Russians attempted to concentrate their forces for a renewed wave of assaults and to regain the initiative. Ukrainians countered this by destroying the Russian units with air power and drive-by raids before they had the chance to launch their assaults. The main Russian goal in this direction continues to be establishing control over the town of Lipsk and creating a buffer zone to push Ukrainian artillery away from the international border. Previously, Ukrainians were able to demoralize Russian units with drone strikes to the point that Russian soldiers abandoned their positions as soon as Ukrainians launched counterattacks. In desperation, Russian commanders saturated the area with reserves, which halted the Ukrainian momentum, but only in the short term. The Institute for the Study of War reported that Russian forces were gathering near HIMARS. Such a concentration of forces can only mean that Russians were preparing for a new wave of attacks toward Lipsk. The reason Russians decided to use HIMARS as the launching area for their renewed attacks is quite complex. Russians are unable to transfer a large number of armored vehicles into the area, as Ukrainian drone operators are operating well behind the Russian border. Geolocated footage confirms this, as any time Russians attempt to probe Ukrainian defenses with a tank, it quickly gets detected and destroyed by Ukrainian drone operators as soon as it comes close to or crosses the border. This causes Russian forces in the direction of Lipsk to suffer from a severe lack of armored support. Additionally, the terrain between Lukansk and Neskutchna is characterized by a series of small forests separated by large open fields. Russian attempting to cross these fields with assault groups made up of pure infantry would be suicide, as Ukrainians have a large window of opportunity to spot and destroy the enemy. This leaves only one possible axis of advance for large infantry assaults in this region. The distance between HIMARS and the northern Dachas of Lipsk is relatively short, which limits the exposure of Russian soldiers to Ukrainian fire while they move to their target. Ukrainians had initially pushed the Russians out of these dachas, but the new Russian forces' concentration here indicates that Russians plan to attack and regain the foothold. Ukrainians understood the threat this growing Russian force posed to Ukrainian defenders in the dachas and immediately sprang into action. Firstly, Ukrainian drone operators spotted Russian infantry moving into one of the buildings in HIMARS before targeting it with an FPV drone. And it turns out that Russians had also gathered ammunition here, as it quickly caught fire and burned down the building. As you may remember from a previous report, Ukrainians also targeted numerous Russian air defense systems inside Russian territory. This significantly weakened the Russian air defense network, allowing Ukrainians to conduct airstrikes on the Russian forces' concentrations in HIMARS. Geolocated footage shows how Ukrainian troops targeted other buildings that Russians had moved into with a series of joint direct attack munition (JDAM) airstrikes. Ukrainian drone operators then continued to monitor the settlement and called in airstrikes on Russian positions, leveling any Russian building to the ground. Ukrainians also complemented the JDAM strikes, which are launched from fixed-wing aircraft, with helicopter close air support, to rain down further destruction on Russian forces in the settlement. Geolocated footage also shows two Ukrainian Mi-24P Hind heavy attack helicopters returning from such a fire mission on HIMARS. To emphasize to the Russian soldiers gathering in HIMARS that Ukrainians would not allow them to collect sufficient forces from launching new attacks. Ukrainian launched a drive-by raid on the settlement with a Ukrainian-made BTR-4E infantry fighting vehicle, nicknamed Boostafel, and Boostafel first drove up to the settlement, firing its secondary gun to suppress Russian infantry hiding in the buildings. After it drove into position, it fired into the settlement with its main autocannon, destroying Russian positions with high explosive ammunition. The vehicle then turned to also fire into the side of the town and a tree line with Russian positions before driving back to safety. The Ukrainian operation to destroy the Russian forces' concentrations succeeded, as the Russians eventually did not launch their storming operation of the northern Dachis. Russian military analysts even reported that due to later Ukrainian counterattacks, Ukrainians were able to advance to the outskirts of Avdiivka. However, the true extent of the damage that Ukrainians had done to Russian forces became clear the next day. Ukrainian Kharkiv Group of Forces spokesperson Yuri Pavlik stated that Russian soldiers were again beginning to abandon their positions. Overall, Ukrainians have successfully prevented a new wave of Russian assaults by destroying the Russian accumulation of forces before they had the chance to attack. The effectiveness of this operation even allowed Ukrainians to regain a small amount of territory despite the large amount of Russian forces present. If Ukrainians can continue to inflict massive casualties on Russian forces and exploit the increasingly low Russian morale, Ukrainians will be able to push the Russian offensive back to the international border. Meanwhile, Russian leaders have responded to this week's development with repeated vows to destroy all Western equipment and personnel in Ukraine, and with warnings that strikes inside Russia using weapons from the West risks nuclear war. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov on Thursday accused Western powers of pursuing a policy of provoking a new level of tensions. Moscow's adversaries abroad, he added, intend to continue the war with Russia, a war in the literal and figurative sense.
Выстрел!